Hi everyone, and welcome to video number 25 on King Henry VIII and his ministers. And this video, ladies and gentlemen, it's all about the religious houses, the local communities, or in other words, to use a key word that we'll look at, the monasteries. Now, previous videos, we've looked at the Reformation, we've looked at religion, Catholic versus Protestants. Religion was very important in the reign of King Henry VIII. This particular video is looking at one aspect, the religious places, the religious buildings, the religious homes, the houses, in other words, the monasteries. Now, 1509, Henry becomes king. There were more than 8,000 monks in England, more than 2,000 nuns. Over 800 religious houses, buildings, monasteries. They did play an important role in local community life. Now, as we'll see later in this video, there are many different tasks, many different roles involved in the monastery, and we'll have a look at them in a minute or two. First of all, there were different types of buildings. Remember I said over 800. Now the larger monasteries were led, if it was for men, they were abbeys led by the abbot. If it was for women and the nuns, they were led by a woman nun called an abbess. That's the large monasteries. Middle-sized monasteries known as priories for the monks, the men, known as nunneries for the women, for the nuns. And then the smaller buildings, the smaller monasteries, were known as friaries for the men, for the monks. So, what was the lifestyle like in these buildings for the men and women, the monks and the nuns? Well, the whole thing is the worship of God. One of their key roles was to pray, go to church, the church services. Now, sometimes today people might go to church once a week. Back then in Henry's time, the monks and the nuns would go to church 8 times a day, ladies and gentlemen, starting at 2 or 3 in the morning. So much so that they had special stairs that they built from the bedroom straight to the church. And because they used those stairs at night, they were called the night stairs. Bed to church, 2 in the morning. I suppose you could say it's that old saying, early to bed, early to rise, makes you healthy, wealthy and wise. That was the lifestyle for the monks and the nuns. Now, they were supposed to lead very, very strict lives. Often they could only speak at certain times during the day. They followed a strict set of rules, for example, the rule of St. Benedict, prayer and work. Many of the monks and many of the nuns, they had a good reputation. They had held a position of respect in the community. People looked up to them. Now remember that healthy, wealthy and wise. Monasteries were quite rich. Why? Land. They owned roughly 1/3 of the land in England. The bigger monasteries had an income of about £1,000 per year. That's putting them on a level with the top nobles. So they were wealthy. Of course, with the land, they could use it for growing crops, raising sheep, etc. Now, the monks, the nuns in the monasteries, they often had good public health because they stored the books from the Romans. Okay, so they were healthy, wealthy. And if they led good lives because they could read and write, people looked up to them. Wise, healthy, wealthy and wise. That's the image that the monks were supposed to have. Now, I mentioned earlier about the role of the monasteries, the jobs that they did. There were many of them. To help you remember them, I've tried to come up with an easy way of remembering it. Now, it's all to do with religion. Think of the word preacher. Well, what does a preacher do? He or she spreads the word of God in their religion. So if we think of that word preachers, it can show us the jobs or the roles involved in the monasteries. There we go. Preachers. 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 And each letter, as we can see, gives us one of the jobs or the roles in the monastery. Well, let's have a look at them one by one. First one, P for prayer. I've already said they went to Mass, church 8 times a day. At the time, it was the old Catholic religion, the belief that prayer was a fast track, a fast way of getting to heaven when you died. So prayer was important. The rich people would say, please pray for me so that when I die, I can get straight to heaven. Remember I said the night stairs? 2 o'clock in the morning was the first service of the day. It was called Matin, which actually comes from the French and the Latin for morning. That was the first service, 2 in the morning, prayer. The last one at night, Compline, 6 in the evening. That's almost their bedtime because they had to be up so early the next day. They wouldn't complain about Compline. Sorry, terrible wordplay. So, the first job, the most important job, prayer. The second one, religion. Many of the monks and nuns, they held a life of contemplation, thinking. They were supposed to be themselves quite poor, even though the monastery was rich due to land. They were supposed to lead very good, obedient lives, unmarried, because they were dedicated to God. They were supposed to lead a life of good example to everybody else, because religion was at the centre of their life. Third role, the education. Now, children of the wealthy, boys only, children of the wealthy, the wealthy boys, were taught by the monks. Remember, the monks could read and write. So monasteries were also places of learning. Monks wrote books. There's some very, very beautiful illuminated letters and manuscripts, almost like works of art done by the monks, handwritten, taking years and years and years. Education was a third role, a third job for the monasteries. Now, what's this A? Administration. Well, remember, healthy, wealthy and wise, the monks helped to dispense justice. They were respected, remember, ladies and gentlemen. 30 of them, the top monks, the abbots if you like, they actually held places in the House of Lords down in London. They were important people. Some of them even advised King Henry himself. So they were involved in the administration of the country because they were respected people. The fourth, admin. Now, the C, commercial, business. I've already said, remember, monasteries owned lots of land. Some of the land they rented out to farmers so the farmers could grow the crops. And of course the monks, the monastery would take a certain cut of the money. If you like, the monastery or the monks were the landlords. The abbots, the leaders, they were almost like business leaders, like men and women today who are the chair or the CEO of a very big corporation. Many of the monasteries were very good at commerce, business. They were money-making enterprises. So that's another important role of the monasteries, money. Now the next one, the H, hospital, or to use the word that they used at the time, the infirmary. We still use that today. Many of our local hospitals are called whatever, blah, blah, infirmary. It comes from this time. and many of the monasteries had particular buildings which were known as infirmaries or the hospital. So they had an important role looking after the sick, the ill, the dying. It was part of their job, particularly at a time when medicine and doctors were quite expensive. No NHS then, ladies and gentlemen. People had to pay, so the rich could afford it, but the poor couldn't. Many of the poor would try to use the monastery. So that's a very important role for the community. They looked after the sick, the ill, the dying, because it was their role. Religion's important to look after the community, the hospitals. Now the next one, economic and social care. Remember, help for the poor, the sick, but also help for the poor, widows, people who weren't doing very well could go to the monastery for help, maybe a meal. Can you see what they're doing? They're acting for the benefit of the community. Sometimes they provided jobs for the local people on their land, etc. Sometimes it was food for the poor. So they are therefore helping the community economically and socially. Now the last two jobs, refuge and safety. Put those together. At that time in England, if you were travelling around, there were no motorways. Travel was difficult and lengthy. So the monasteries dotted all over England, often they acted a bit like a sort of hotel or a bed and breakfast or a motorway service station, a place where travellers would stop, sleep the night, get some food, a meal before continuing their journey. Okay? Providing a service for the community. Also, if you were being threatened, you could actually run to the monastery and seek what we call sanctuary for people who are under threat. So we see that the monasteries, if you look at that, if they are doing all of those tasks, they are a very important and useful part. They are a benefit, a help to the community. The monasteries. Try to remember it. Preachers. That should help you remember some of their key roles. Hopefully. Now, on the whole then, monasteries, religious houses seem to bring many benefits to the local community. If, small word but very important, if the monks and the nuns are following the rules, they will be highly respected in their community. But here's a tricky one. Yet, if you were travelling around England today and you came across a monastery from the time of King Henry VIII, remember, 800 of them, none of them today look like they did in Henry VIII's time. Now you might think, of course not, it's a long time ago. They are all in ruins. They're all in ruins. Reminds me of that joke. Two men sat in a bar. One man says, my career's in ruins. His friend says, well, that's terrible. Why are you laughing? He says, well, I'm an archaeologist. I apologise for that terrible joke. Quickly moving on. Now, all the monasteries from Henry VIII's time are in ruins. But if you look at other buildings from Henry VIII's time, maybe cathedrals or old houses, they're perfectly okay. They're not in ruins. So therefore there's a key question for us. Why are the monasteries from Henry VIII's time, just the monasteries, why are those buildings all in ruins? Now, why? The answer to that, ladies and gentlemen, step forward, our old friend from previous videos, Thomas Cromwell. What did Cromwell do to the monasteries? The answer is coming in our next video. So there we have it, the role of the monasteries. preachers. As ever, I hope it's been useful. All the best now. See you soon for the next video. Bye now.